Hello, you are listening to 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave, diverse music for your diverse mind. I'm your host, Jell, and I recommend you stay tuned until noon, because at noon we will have the news, the weather, and then after a short break, GameBabble Live, our video game news and information show, which airs every Wednesday from noon to 3 p.m. So please, stay tuned to 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave, diverse music for your diverse mind. That was The Greatest by Sia featuring Kendrick Lamar back there. Now it's time for Something I'm Good At by Brett Eldridge. Thank you for listening. Currently, it is 82 degrees here on the campus of Florissant Valley Community College. I'm Jell with your noon news update. In local news, motorcycle thefts are up in St. Louis. Motorcycle thefts are on the rise in St. Louis. Through May of this year, 25 motorcycles were stolen in St. Louis. Last year, there were only 16 motorcycle thefts during that time span. U-City man charged for North County murder. A University City man is accused of a North County murder. The St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office says Christopher Cross was charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action on Sunday. He is accused of killing Ronald Morris of Spanish Lake at an apartment complex in the 3500 block of Candlebrook Court last week. And the Sheriff's Department searching for missing woman. The St. Clair County Sheriff's Department is searching for a missing elderly woman. Virginia Arbogast was last seen in Belleville on Monday night. She was driving to Lebanon, Illinois, but never arrived. She is 80 years old, about 5'2" and 150 pounds, with gray hair. Anyone who knows where she could be is asked to call the Sheriff's Department. In national news, President Trump says the U.S. has a bad trade record. The president took to Twitter this morning saying, quote, "The United States made some of the worst trade deals in world history. Why should we continue these deals with countries that do no help us?" That's what it says. Trump also took a swipe at China, of course, following rising tensions between the U.S. and North Korea, saying the country grew their trade with North Korea by nearly 40% in the first quarter. The UN Security Council is holding an emergency meeting today on North Korea. The U.S., Japan, and South Korea called for the meeting shortly after the successful missile test this week. North Korea claims the intercontinental ballistic missile can carry a nuclear warhead. Republican and Democrat senators are pushing the Trump administration, to come up with a new plan in Afghanistan. Republican Senators John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and David Perdue joined Democrats Elizabeth Warren and Sheldon Whitehouse in Afghanistan. McCain told reporters that none of the senators would say the U.S. is on a course to success in Afghanistan, adding, quote, "That needs to change and quickly." The city of Chicago is recovering from an especially violent 4th of July weekend. At least 100 people were shot across the city between Friday and this morning. The Chicago Tribune reports that 15 of the wounded died. Last year's Independence Day weekend ended with over 60 people wounded in shootings. And a group in Utah is taking the title for flying the largest American flag ever flown in the U.S. The group Follow the Flag hung the flag yesterday in Grove Creek Canyon in Utah County. The flag is 78 feet wide and 150 feet long and costs $15,000 to make. The group will leave the flag hanging in the canyon through Sunday night. I don't really have any campus news with me, so it's time for some weather. As I said, today it's currently 82 degrees, and I guess that's actually the high, huh? Yeah, high of 82, low of 72, and I was hearing we might be getting some rain later on. Tomorrow, though, we are looking at a high of 87, low of 75, and it will be partly sunny. I think, I'm seeing 90% humidity. I think that'd be even more plausible, but whatever. So tomorrow, high of 87, low of 75. Friday, high of 93, low of 73. Saturday, high of 87, low of 74. And both Friday and Saturday are sunny. Sorry about that. Mostly sunny anyway. And then Sunday, we are looking at a high of 88 and a low of 75, with it being partly sunny. So we're probably going to get some rain soon-ish. Either today or tomorrow. But, precipitation is looking pretty high for those 2 days. But otherwise, Yeah, just go be in the high 80s, low 90s all throughout the week. Anyway, that concludes our news and weather. Currently, again, it is 82 degrees here at KCFV. I'm Jell, and this has been your noon news update. And please stay tuned, because after a short break, we will be back with GameBabble Live, your video game news and information show, which airs every Wednesday from noon to 3 p.m., well, noonish, here on 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave. Thank you so much for listening. Until then, here's Volchurch by Macri. Hello, you are listening to 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave, diverse music for your diverse mind. I'm your host, Jell, and this is GameBabble Live, our video game news and information show, which airs every Wednesday from noon to 3 p.m. And we love to start the show off with what games are released this week, what's coming out next week, as well as what anime are in theaters. However, I gotta say, slow release week. Why? Because Tuesday's usually when usually when the days come out. The days come out on Tuesday. Did you know that? No, games come out on Tuesdays. And, of course, yesterday was July the 4th, the 4th of July. Happy day after the 4th of July, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your fireworks. Unfortunately, that meant that, nothing came out. No, seriously, brace yourself. This is actually kind of amazing. So let's start with PlayStation 4. What came out this week? Some game called That's You. And today, LEGO Worlds Classic Space Expansion. And tomorrow, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare Absolution. I assume that's another expansion pack. And Toby, the Secret Mine. That's about it. So, what's going on Xbox One? Well, Xbox One got LEGO Worlds Classic Space Expansion. Good. Glad we can have this talk. How about the PlayStation Vita? Well, in 2 days, the PlayStation Vita will be getting Excel World versus Sword Art Online, which I thought was getting a PS4 release, but I guess not. I was mildly interested in that because of the Excel World part. Anyway, that's coming out in 2 days, so that's something. That's about it there. How about the 3DS? Oh, 3DS has the most releases. As of tomorrow, the 3DS will be getting Crawler's Game Pack, Kirby's Blowout Blast, Stack 'em High, and Table Tennis Infinity. And Switch, what you got? Switch got nothing. Although, part of this is because they did not have the latest news, because tomorrow, you're not going to believe this, Shantae is coming to Blaster Master Zero on 3DS and Switch as a downloadable character, which will be free for the first week if you already own those games. So, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, that's at least a thing that was announced yesterday and coming out tomorrow. Anyway, what's coming out next week? Let's see. Well, PlayStation 4 next week will have a game called Black the Fall. What really excites me, though, is that next week is Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age, which I'm preposterously excited about because I actually liked Final Fantasy XII, and I was a little iffy on the International Zodiac Job System version. But the PlayStation 4 Zodiac Age version fixes my one problem with that. That problem being that, instead of being able to really customize your character, you picked one license board and that was it, and your character was stuck in a very specialized role. But the Zodiac Age adds in the ability to unlock a second license board, so you can combine the two license boards and get higher stats than ever before, and all of a sudden the customization is back and better than ever, because the whole thing with having the limited license boards was that it would allow you to raise your stats higher than normal because you'd be more specialized, and now you can be super specialized. Anyway, Hunting Simulator is apparently also coming out next week for PlayStation 4, along with Minecraft Story Mode Season 2, the Telltale series. And, of course, that means Minecraft Story Mode Season 2, Episode 1, Hero in Residence, in the off chance you like Minecraft Story Mode. And then, later on in the week, we got Lily, Child of Geos, Rogue Stormers, and World to the West. So those are all things for next week on PlayStation 4. How about Xbox One? What you got next week? Next week, Xbox One gets Black the Fall, Fable Fortune. Is that actually related to the Fable series? I don't know. Yeah, it looks like it is. It's some kind of card game. Okay, so a Fable-themed card game will be coming to Xbox One next week. Hunting Simulator, Minecraft Story Mode Season 2, Telltale Series, and Episode 1 of Hero in Residence. And after that, Iron Cryptical. Okay. And then after that, Rogue Stormers, Serial Cleaner, and World to the West. That's next week for the Xbox One. Nintendo Switch, what you got next week? You got Death Squared. And then, yeah. Let's see. Nothing for Vita next week. And the 3DS is getting As Divine Cross, which is one of the Kemco monthly RPGs from the cell phones. Not sure if you know this, but on Android, Japanese company called Kemco has a tendency to release a new retro-styled JRPG every week. Quality varies drastically. Some of them actually really impressed me, and were like, oh, wow, this is a nice retro throwback. Others felt cheaper than a quickly thrown-together RPG Maker game. It was all over the place with those things. But, yeah, they've decided to take some of their, I guess, best ones and port them to other systems. We've seen a few on PS4, a few on 3DS, and there goes another one. I believe, yeah, that should, that sums up our new game releases for this week and next week. Now then, on to anime in theaters. So, July 12th and 13th, Project Ito Genocidal Organ will be in theaters. On, again, July 12th and 13th. Seems like an interesting military-themed film. Then, July 23rd and 24th is Kiki's Delivery Service, as part of the Ghibli Fest 2017. And then August 11th is In This Corner of the World. So, that about concludes our anime in theaters, as well as what games have been released this week and next week. I was gonna get into a thing about me and Funimation, but you know what? I don't feel like getting into it. I'm just a little angry at them right now, but we'll just keep that personal. Anyway, so that clears that up. How about we kick back to the music, and then when we get back, we will begin discussing some video game news. Until then, here is From the Kicks to the Cribs by Hyson Dominique. Once again, this is 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave, diverse music for your diverse mind. Thank you so much for listening, and please stay tuned for more GameBabble Live. Thank you. Hello, and welcome back to GameBabble Live here on 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave, diverse music for your diverse mind. That was From the Kicks to the Cribs by Hyson Dominique. Anyway, so we just went over what games released this week, what's coming out next week. The answer is not a lot, except for Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age. Super excited about that. I've talked about it in the past. Final Fantasy XII is such a weird one, because you really got to ask yourself, is it possible for a game to sell 5 million copies worldwide, get perfect review scores, and still be considered underrated and overlooked? And that is how I feel about Final Fantasy XII. Because in spite of all of that, it is probably the Final Fantasy game the least amount of people played. Like, seriously, I know so many of my friends who are hardcore Final Fantasy fans, and they play every single game in the series. But 12, no, they skipped that. Even when I was telling them just how great 12 was and how much I loved it, they were just like, no, not really. And it's really annoying, because one of those friends is actually, he was a playtester at Nintendo who playtested Xenoblade Chronicles and also wrote the strategy guides for Xenoblade Chronicles and Xenoblade Chronicles X. And the thing is, Xenoblade Chronicles is actually really, really similar to Final Fantasy XII, and he loves that game. He probably put, like, 300 hours into the original because of playing through it once or twice for the job, and then more again for the guide. And, and yet he still wouldn't give Final Fantasy XII a chance, even though it is blatantly inspired by it. And I do mean blatantly, like, in both Xenoblade Chronicles and The Last Story, they have characters that look like Vossler from Final Fantasy XII. And I'm just like, at least they're wearing it on their sleeve. And it's great that people liked Xenoblade Chronicles, but it's like, I'll go back, give 12 a chance. But then again, looks like what people are starting to do. It's starting to gain a cult fan base, which I knew this would happen. I remember when 12 first came out, I said, you know what, give it 10 years. This is going to be the next Final Fantasy IX. Because that's what happened with 9. Let's be real here. 9 came out, it flopped, no one cared. Then, years later, people, go back, actually, grab Final Fantasy IX out of a bargain bin, and, oh, wow, this game's amazing. It's one of my favorite entries in the series. Why didn't I give this a chance sooner? It's like, I know exactly why you didn't give it a chance sooner. It has a weird visual style. 9 was trying to be a throwback, and in a lot of senses it was, but even though we wanted the super deformed visual style back, we didn't want it back in that way. I don't know, it looked a little bit too silly and cartoony in spite of how dark the plot could actually get, and it looked less medieval fantasy and more Renaissance-y. I don't know, 9 was weird, but I totally get the love it gets, because it is a good game, but it was also a weird-looking game at the time, and we were just weirded out by it. I remember that being a thing. And yeah, 12 was another one of those situations where people saw that the battle system was radically different. It looked like an offline version of an MMORPG, which in some senses it was, and people were like, no, this isn't a real Final Fantasy game. But I liked it because it did go back to the medieval fantasy-ish setting, when a lot of recent Final Fantasies have been more futuristic and science fiction-y. It's like, what happened to the fantasy? That was one of the main reasons why I liked it. That, and I really like Final Fantasy Tactics, and the artist for that, Akihiko Yoshida, and the fact that the Tactics team made 12 was nice. That was because the main Final Fantasy team with Tetsuya Nomura was too busy working on Kingdom Hearts 2 at the time. Kingdom Hearts is Nomura's baby, so yeah, they were busy with that, so they had to have someone else make a Final Fantasy game. They got the Tactics team. It was great. One thing I will say, though, I totally understand the people who are like, I don't want to play this because it's an offline MMORPG, because I kind of hate a lot of MMORPGs, too. Mostly because a lot of times the combat is, you click on an enemy and you wait until it falls over. And that's what most of your grinding is. There's not a lot of interactivity. 12 did fix that, in my opinion. And that's due to the fact that you control 3 party members at once. A lot of people overlook this. A lot of people look at 12 and say, it's an offline MMO that pretty much plays itself. Yes and no. See, 12 had this thing called the Gambit system. And the idea behind the Gambit system was that you could pre-program the AI of your party members so that way they could act automatically in very smart ways. However, if you wanted them to be truly automatic for a lot of combat, you would need to spend a large amount of time creating your gambit, and then, well, you pretty much just gave them all their commands in advance. I didn't like to do that. I always gave them very basic gambits, and then whenever I got into combat, I just manually controlled them. Because what you do is you press X, and time freezes, and then you press left and right to switch which character you want to give commands to, give them a command, and then, time resumes, and they do that command. And whatever commands you give them overwrites their gambits. The point of the gambits is just the fact that the turns, the ATB bar, fills up kind of fast in Final Fantasy XII, and it's like, oh, this is going to be a pain in the butt to try to manage, because people are getting their turns and doing their attacks so quickly that it would be hard to manage all of them at once, so you can give them some auto orders ahead of time, and then manually control them if you want. And that was sort of the funny thing to me. And I actually did this. I would actually pause the game bring up the command menu, and then rotate the camera to the side, and I'd be like, oh, good, nothing's changed. Because you could get it where everyone was lined up on the right side, and the enemies are on the left side. Pro tip, your left analog stick doesn't really do anything in battle. Because I know a lot of people, like, when they go into combat, they're constantly, like, running around with your character. It doesn't do anything. Just let go of it. When you get into combat, let go of the left analog stick, you will find that your character kind of moves automatically on their own. There's not a lot of purpose to moving around. Just turn the camera to the side, and it'll turn into classic Final Fantasy almost. It's kind of amusing like that. Yeah, I really liked it. I'm looking forward to this, because I mentioned they've got the new international Zodiac job system, but now you get 2 jobs. That's very, very nice. And then the other thing that I'm the most excited about, actually, other than, the fact they're prettying up the graphics a little bit. Well, 12 still looks pretty good today. That's a nice looking game. But what I'm happy about is that the new one has an auto-save feature, and hopefully that also means the ability to save in more places. Because if I had one complaint with 12, other than a poorly laid out license board, it was the save point starvation. There were not enough save points in that game, and that's why I never beat it. Because I was trying to get to the Still Shrine of Miriam. I remember this, because that's also where you get the Zeramis summon, and I was super excited about that. But I couldn't get from the town to the shrine ever. Sometimes it would be because a random elemental would pop up and kill me almost instantly. Sometimes it would be because the cable guy got there when I was really, really deep in and I had to turn it off. Sometimes it would be because just there was, I think one time I had a power outage in the middle of it. Just the length of time between that town and that shrine is long enough that I could not traverse it without something going wrong. And eventually I just kind of gave up. So I look forward to autosaves. I look forward to maybe being able... I'm hoping I can save in each, area. That would be nice. So that way I can get to the shrine and get my Zeramis summon and get on with the game. By the way, the summons are going to be better now because you can directly control them instead of them sort of just farting around after you summon them. So I'm just hearing a lot of good things with this Zodiac Age version. And, it's about time. The saddest thing, though, is when you realize why it was made. Because you want to say, oh, now Final Fantasy XII has, enough of a fan base that it's getting the second chance it deserves. No. It's because Square Enix ran out of PS2 games to re-release. I mean, look at it. They re-released Final Fantasy X and X-2. Then they on PS3. Then they re-released Kingdom Hearts 1 and Chain of Memories on PS3. Then Kingdom Hearts 2 and Birth by Sleep on PS3. Then Final Fantasy X and X-2 on PS4. Then Kingdom Hearts 1 and Chain of Memories on PS4. Then 2 and Birth by Sleep on PS4. Then Dream Drop Distance and a thing they made up on PS4. And now Square Enix is like, oh no. We're running out of big PS2 games to release. Quick, release Final Fantasy XII. You know that's what's really going on here, right? Because it is. That's what's going on. Oh, I love it. I love it. Whatever gets the job done, right? Right, what other PS2 games does Square Enix have that would be worthy of that kind of a re-release? I mean, you could say, go more on the Enix side, say Dragon Quest VIII, except that just got a re-release on 3DS, so no. Although if there was a console port of Dragon Quest IX, that would make me very happy. 9 was so good. Yeah, I mean, Dawn of Mana was not a real big success. No one really cared about Brave Samurai Musashi. Yeah, I don't know. I'd almost say Crystal Chronicles. I really like the original Crystal Chronicles, but I hear I'm alone on that one, and that's more of a Nintendo thing, but yeah, I wonder how they'd handle a Switch port of that. Would they finally admit you really didn't need that GBA all that much? Anyway, looking at the time, I think it's time for some diverse PSAs for your diverse mind, so we're going to take a short break, and when we get back, I don't know, I'm probably going to continue talking about Square Enix and then, get on with the rest of this news. I've got a list of things to talk about, you don't worry. So anyway, thank you for listening to 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave. Stay tuned. yeah. And we will be right back with more GameBabble Live after a short break. Thank you. Hello, you're listening to 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave. Diverse music for you, for your diverse mind. I'm your host, Jell. This is GameBabble Live, and that was Is It You by Addicted to Dopeness. Anyway, getting back to the topic at hand, where I was desperately trying to figure out what in the heck Square Enix would release as an HD remaster next, because why not just remaster everything you did on PS2? If we were actually going PS2, I think, well, PS2 era, I think next up would probably have to be a double pack of Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core and Dirge of Cerberus, and maybe fill us in on what the deal was with Before Crisis? Amusingly, that would probably sell pretty okay, because people, like, nobody likes Dirge of Cerberus, except a few people. But I know a number of people who swear by Crisis Core and say that it's a pretty good game. I couldn't quite get into it last time I gave it a chance, but I'm making my prediction that's going to be the next remaster. Because why not just remaster everything? I mean, what are they going to do? Remaster Final Fantasy XIII Trilogy? No, that comes after you remaster the Final Fantasy VII supplemental games. Oh, you only think I'm joking. I'm telling you, this is gonna happen. But anyway, so, moving on past that, the big news that surprised me is that we are getting Shantae as a downloadable character for Blaster Master Zero tomorrow. That's on 3DS and Switch. And of course, that also means that next month we'll get Shovel Knight. Because Shovel Knight has to be in everything. If you haven't seen it, they've done some DLC characters already, because they did Gunvolt and Akaro from Galgun for Blaster Master Zero. And I gotta give them credit, they actually make the characters play differently. Like, Akaro has a bunch of different, like, unique gun weapons and stuff, and can kind of float, because she's an angel and stuff. And Shantae will have the hair whip, the ability to shoot fireballs, and the transformation dances. I know that on the, in the side-scrolling sections, she can turn into a monkey. In the top-down sections, she can turn into an elephant, as well as turning into a bunch of the enemies from the game. And it looks super fun, and I like the way they're handling the DLC, because again, it's free for the first week, and then afterwards, like, not allowed to say prices, but prices are really low on those characters, and I'm like, sure, why not? Just why not? Out of nowhere. Moving on past that, though, there's a trailer floating around if you want to hunt it down. It's the one for Blaster Master Zero Update 1.03. You can find it on YouTube. Just, like, search Blaster Master Zero trailer 1.03 and you'll find it. If not, then just sort by date. You'll find it that way. Anyway, Summer Games Done Quick is on right now, if anyone is unaware. And that's sort of the second half of Awesome Games Done Quick, which is a big charity stream that they do every year, one in the winter, one in the summer, where they have people speedrunning games it's like a 24/7 stream all week long. They're raising money for charity, and it's just generally entertaining to watch. That's how a lot of people have learned about speedrunning through it. The idea of speedrunning, of course, being going through a video game as fast as possible, which, sometimes involves using various exploits and glitches and stuff. Like, you might find, I can skip a huge chunk of this stage in Castlevania if I turn around and get intentionally hit by an enemy, so that way when they knock me backwards, it knocks me up a platform. Or sometimes you find out, if I backflip through this exact pixel in a wall, I'll clip through the stage, and if I move in a very exacting way, I can, skip half the game. Like, there's all sorts of just weird tricks that you can pull in games in order to get through them faster. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is kind of infamous for that. Sometimes they do speedrun races. I think they usually do it for Super Metroid every year. That's how they like to end things. And then, yeah, it's just good times. If you watch any speedrun, I generally recommend the Sonic ones, especially Sonic Generations. I was watching a bit of that this year, and yeah, Sonic's kind of a good game for speedrunning, because you go fast. And yeah, the funny thing about Sonic speedruns, especially in the newer games, which I guess they're calling the Boost Trilogy, is that there's a number of different skips. You can skip huge chunks of the stage by flying off the course and, clipping through buildings. And if you go too fast in the modern Sonic games, then the stage will be invisible. Because Sonic stages are kind of big, because you go through them so fast. So if they displayed the entire stage and all the polygons at the same time, the game would not run smoothly. So technically, you don't know this when you're playing the games, but they're only, displaying a certain chunk of the polygons in any Sonic stage, and then once you pass a certain point, it turns off the old polygons and turns on, the next chunk of stage. But if you go too fast, you skip the thing that detects that that it should turn on the polygons, and as such, all you got is hitboxes. So that winds up making that very tricky, because it's hey, I just skipped half the stage, and now I have to walk on thin air and memorize where everything is. It's pretty nuts. I haven't made it to the end of watching the archive of that speedrun. I hear the game actually locks up at some point, but Sonic speedruns are usually very enjoyable. So Summer Games Done Quick is going on right now. Outside of that, guess what? Next week is EVO, the Evolution Fighting Game Tournament, the biggest fighting game tournament in the world, and sure enough, Dragon Ball FighterZ will be at EVO. There will be a small pre-release tournament for it. There won't be very many characters. There'll be 7 characters, I think, maybe 8. Maybe. I don't even know if they've actually implemented Trunks yet or not. The game is still early. There's so much excitement for it. They're we'll hold a tournament now. Everyone wants to play it. And it's not going to be a real tournament, but they do want to show off the game, and they're going to have people playing it, and people are very excited about that. I know I was talking to a friend the other day, and he was very disappointed due to the fact that a lot of people are, of course, saying that Dragon Ball FighterZ is the new Marvel vs. Capcom. Because that's what it is. It's Marvel vs. Capcom with Dragon Ball characters. And he's I don't think it's a zero-sum game. Why can't we have both? Why can't both Dragon Ball FighterZ and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite both be good? Why does it have to be one or the other? And I'm you're right. We should ask Capcom about that. Let's just be real here. The only reason people are saying that isn't because they wouldn't play Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite if it was good. If Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite turns out good and they start releasing some really good characters for it, people would be excited for it. But that's the problem. Actually, it's almost too late for Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Because Capcom was announcing DLC characters and ridiculously expensive special editions before they announced the actual core roster. The core roster is way smaller than it usually is, and it's mostly made of characters that weren't in previous games, on top of the whole X-Men debacle. Have you heard about this? For Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, one of the big questions everyone's asking is, where are the X-Men at? People kind of like Wolverine. That's usually how you promote things. Once upon a time, there was a thing called, Wolverine promotion, where you just have a crossover with Wolverine and your stuff gets promoted. You just put Wolverine in everything. One time, Wolverine was in, 5 places at once, because you just can't get enough Wolverine. So everyone's where'd that Wolverine guy go? Oh, he's not here. Okay. Little awkward. And the things that Capcom's PR has been saying is magical. Because people are oh, we really want Magneto. And they were well, Magneto's just a series of functions. He's got that 8-way air dash. Well, Nova has that too, so you could just play Nova. What you gotta remember is that this is like a new generation of players, so they might not even remember the X-Men. Capcom got so much crap for that. Of course, the reality of it is that, like Marvel, they have the rights to those characters, obviously, for comics, and probably have the rights for video games, so they could put them in there, but they don't have the movie rights, and they don't want to put in characters that would promote movies from other companies. That's what it's really about. They haven't officially said this, but you know that's what it is, because otherwise people wouldn't say dumb things like no one knows what the X-Men are and Magneto's just a function. It's the only logical explanation, because obviously this game is very much meant to promote the Marvel movies. It's more movie-themed than comic-themed, and as such, they're trying to focus on characters who are in movies or in upcoming movies. It's a really dumb situation, and Capcom was probably told, this is what's going on, but you can't actually say that. So, make something up. Just whatever you do, don't say we can't put X-Men in the game, but we can't put X-Men in the game. And so people are just struggling for something, but it's really clear Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite is being very rushed. There's the way Capcom is handling the DLC has everyone pissed off. And the only problem was people really like their Marvel. So when Arc Systems Works shows up, we're like, hey, we got Marvel, but it's with Dragon Ball Z characters. Everyone's like, okay, I'm leaving, bye. If Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite magically turned around and had like a roster of 30 characters, including really obscure ones, and like they improved the graphics and everything got fixed up and it was all happy days again, people would play it. Maybe people will play Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. But the reason why everyone's going, I'm going to play Dragon Ball FighterZ instead, isn't because they wouldn't play Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. It's because they want to give the middle finger to Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite because they are not happy with Capcom's handling of it. That's what this is really about. But speaking of things that will be at EVO, Arika's April Fool's game will also be there. This was a strange thing that happened on April 1st. Arika started showing screenshots of a mystery fighting game featuring characters from Street Fighter EX. And we were like, what? Is this an April Fool's joke? And then they streamed people playing the game for hours on end because they really made a game that has 3 Street Fighter EX characters in it. It's, what is it? Kairi, Garuda, and Hokuto, I think were their names. And people were just like, your game looks good. Game looks better than Street Fighter V. I really want to play this. Why is this an April Fool's joke? And they're like, yeah, it's just an April Fool's joke. But at the same time, making it an April Fool's joke was part of their plan to try to get it attention, Just pose it as an April Fool's joke and see if anyone gets excited about it. Well, I got excited about it. I like Street Fighter EX. Like, you know what? If you're like, wow, Street Fighter EX sucks, give it a second chance. Now is the time to go back, give Street Fighter EX the second chance it deserves. It's actually a much better fighting game than you remember. It's super fun. And yeah, basically Arika, the developers of Street Fighter EX, would love to make a new Street Fighter EX game, but of course they don't have the rights to the Street Fighter characters, so it would just be the EX characters. So just Skullomania and Pullum Purna and Cracker Jack, maybe Blair Dane and Alan Snyder showing back up. And that's what they're like looking at doing, but they're going to need to get people like super excited for the game. Like, Arika's a really small company. They probably have very limited funding and don't know how exactly they're going to pull this off. But apparently they're adding in some new mechanics to the game, and it will be playable at EVO. They're only going to have like one station for it. Like, the game doesn't even have a name, but I'm hearing that Namco is interested in publishing it. Because Namco published a game they had made previously called Fighting Layer, which was this other game that had Blair Dane and Alan Snyder in it. And they're thinking of calling the game, like, Fighting EX Layer. And everyone's on board with it, or at least I'm on board with it. I want that. That game looks good. So, that is what's going on with the Mystery Arika Fighter. I'm going to take a quick musical break. And when we get back, we will talk probably a little bit about the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy and how that's going down. So please stay tuned to 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave, diverse music for your diverse mind. Coming up next is Too Bad Canada's Not a State by Make Me Break Me. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy the music. Hello, you are listening to 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave, diverse music for your diverse mind. That was Round Here Buzz by Eric Church, and this is GameBabble Live, your video game news and information show which airs every Wednesday from noon to 3 p.m. I'm your host, Joe. Sorry for the slightly long break. And before the break, we were saying that I was going to talk about Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, but before that, little thing I forgot to mention, I was just looking at the game releases for Nintendo Switch, and much to my surprise, Knights of Azure 2, Bride of the New Moon, is slated to come to the Switch in America. This is a very striking development. See, I don't know about you, but I have a certain love for weird, low-budget Japanese games. And unfortunately, Nintendo has never really capitalized on these. Like, a lot of these games don't really use that much power. Some of them are even ports of Vita games. But I like them because, they're creative and interesting and something different. They might be a little rough around the edges and stuff. And I've always wondered, why weren't there any of these on the Wii U? Because a lot of them, a little while back were getting PS3, PS4 releases, so it would have been really easy to put them on the Wii U, because the Wii U could have handled the PS3 version of the game, but they didn't. And I was like, that's probably Nintendo's overbearing quality control and censorship concerns getting in the way. Well, Knights of Azure 2 is one of these kinds of games, and it looks like it's coming to Switch, along with, that Fate Extella, the Umbral Star. I think that kind of is in the same zone, and along with Toho Kobuto V Burst Battle. So, could Nintendo be loosening up there? Could they be allowing more of the weird, low-budget Japanese games to actually be on their system? I hope so, because that would help. The more games you have on your system, in general, the better. The only reason I say in general is because, man, the Nintendo Wii releases were kind of a mess. I mean, that one Nintendo just let pretty much anything on their system, and you would find weird games in the bargain bin that, aren't listed in any computer system anywhere. I remember picking up a weird boxing game called Power Punch at Best Buy for, a budget price, and it was not listed on Game FAQs for the longest time. I still don't know if it's listed on Game FAQs. It was very odd. It was actually a reskin of a Hajime no Ippo Victorious Boxers game. Because there was Victorious Boxers on the Wii, and Power Punch was just that, but with unlicensed characters. It was from the exact same company, played exactly the same. Just, different characters. But, moving on past that, Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy came out last Friday, and good times were had. Because, it is the first 3 Crash Bandicoot games, now with super fancy graphics, at a, surprisingly low price. This was very nice. And as I mentioned before, this was a very, very smart move, because really all the people who worked on the original Crash Bandicoot left Naughty Dog and pretty much the industry. You can't get a Crash Bandicoot game made by the original developers. So someone had to learn how to make a Crash Bandicoot game, having Vicarious Visions sit down and try to recreate Crash 1, 2, and 3 from scratch, pretty much, was definitely a good crash course in crash making. So, how'd it turn out? People are generally very pleased. You do have to beat the first boss of Crash 1 and Crash 2, respectively, to unlock the ability to play as Coco in those games, and you can only play as Coco in, like, the regular stages, not in any vehicle stages or boss fights. But still, it is a very greatly appreciated feature because fans have been demanding it literally for years, like, at least since Crash 3. But, of course, the aftermath of this game is what really intrigues me. The first is the fact that people have started calling Crash Bandicoot 1 the Dark Souls of platformers, because everything is the Dark Souls of everything. And I like to joke about the fact that Bleach Dark Souls is the Dark Souls of Bleach. There is a game called Bleach Dark Souls on the DS. It came out before Dark Souls. It's a really good fighting game. It's from Treasure. But, I'm getting off topic. Crash, people have been saying that about Crash 1, and they started looking into it, and they're like, something's wrong here. And what happened was they actually gave Crash 1, 2, and 3 the same general control scheme. Like, you still can't slide in Crash 1, but it's like the same jump physics and controls, because they've added in analog controls and made a few tweaks. And no one has any issues with Crash 2 and 3. But Crash 1 had some very precise platforming, and the slight changes to the control and the hitboxes have made the game excessively hard to play. It looks like the biggest problem is sliding off of turtles. Because in Crash Bandicoot, there's an enemy that's a turtle, and you jump on its head, and it flips over, and then it pretty much becomes a bounce pad that you can use to bounce all over the place. And there's this one ludicrous stage called the High Road, which is this broken bridge with turtles on it, and you have to precisely jump from moving turtle trampoline to moving turtle trampoline, and people kept finding themselves sliding off of the turtles. Just the area where you can land on the turtle is, like, too small, and I don't know if it's exactly a flat hitbox, which would be kind of weird if it wasn't, but people are having trouble not sliding off these turtles. Now, apparently there's a comparison video of the jumps in the Insane Trilogy Crash 1 versus the original, and people are debating that, and it's wondered if they're going to attempt to fix that or not, or if it's just going to have to be a thing we get used to. Either way, things still look promising, because no one has any beef with Crash 2 and 3. It's just Crash 1, because Crash 1 was very precise and exacting and controlled differently, and changing the controls to something smoother and more modern for a game designed around these particular stiff controls wound up having a little bit of a clash. Anyway, though, the game looks amazing, especially in, like, the cutscenes. What few there are like, friggin' put this in a movie theater. This looks just, the facial animations they do in those cutscenes are amazing. Like, I still kind of think that Ratchet and Clank remake looked a little bit more like interactive Pixar than Crash Bandicoot does. That was nice. Also, the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy actually runs at 30 FPS instead of 60, even on a Pro. And the motion blur might be a smidge much at times. But in general, yeah, people are pretty darn pleased with it. And I can't blame them, because they did release it at a low price, and it's 3 games, and it looks amazing. This is good times. It's good times. Now, one thing that I did find interesting, though, is that after this, all of a sudden everyone likes Crash Twinsanity. All of a sudden, Crash Twinsanity's like the only good post-Naughty Dog Crash game. They should remake Crash Twinsanity. Yay, Twinsanity. When's Twinsanity coming out? And I'm like, what, really? Number 1, y'all like Crash Twinsanity that much? And number 2, what about Mind Over Mutant? If you ask me, Mind Over Mutant was the best post-Naughty Dog game. I have a real soft spot for that game. You've heard me talk about it a couple times. If you go back on my YouTube channel, like, almost 10 years ago to episode 3, I make a joke about how Crash Mind Over Mutant is the better Golden Axe Beast Rider, which actually makes sense in context. Because you do ride on beasts, and they did weirdly turn it into a beat-em-up, and it had 2-player co-op and 2 different playable characters. So it was actually better than Golden Axe Beast Rider. It had more beasts to ride than Golden Axe Beast Rider. I still can't get over that. But no, I'm getting a little off topic. I'm surprised how much people like Crash Twinsanity. Although I certainly get it. I played that game. And I think it was a bit rough, definitely unfinished, but had a lot of heart. Like, if you've never seen it, Crash Twinsanity is the one that actually tried to do a big open world. And the whole gimmick was that it was Crash and Cortex kinda, sorta working together. Like, there would be stages where, like, Crash would be hanging onto a power crystal, and so would Cortex, and you would swing Cortex around as a weapon. And then there'd be other stages where Crash and Cortex would start fighting, and they'd just become a ball of violence, and you'd roll this ball through the stage. And it had a great sense of humor. The music was amazing, because it was an all-a-cappella soundtrack by a group called Spiral Mouth. And I'm sorry, all-a-cappella video game soundtrack. That is freaking inspired. I can't blame anyone who liked that. Again, sense of humor was great. It had creative ideas and did try to evolve things, but it was flagrantly unfinished. There was tons of stuff left on the cutting room floor. And it was kind of wonky. Like, visually, it wasn't impressive even at the time, because I played it when it came out. And, excuse me, it had some issues. The biggest issue was the fact that you couldn't cast a shadow on boxes. And that's like, well, why does that matter? Well, in a 3D platformer, you kind of use your shadow to figure out where you're going to land. And there were some platforms made of boxes. So there would be some platforms that you just couldn't tell if you were going to land on them or not. That was the main thing I remember. It was a little bit wonky. If someone wanted to give it an overhaul, I'd be all about it, but yeah, I don't know. But that is sort of the funny thing about Crash Bandicoot's, like, post-Naughty Dog stuff. A lot of people just go, oh, after Naughty Dog, everything from Crash Bandicoot was bad. But it's like, no, it wasn't like Sonic. Because with Sonic, you had some games that were, like, almost okay, but then were also really terrible, and some games that were just absolutely abysmal, and some that were actually pretty okay, and, the quality just went all over the place, and it dipped really low at times. Sonic 06 is pretty unarguably awful, but, Crash Bandicoot never quite went that route, and a large part of that is because Crash Bandicoot was always 3D, so I always had an idea of how to do Crash in 3D. He didn't have a gimmick of speed and physics like Sonic does. He could just be a generic 3D platformer and be okay. That's kind of how I felt about Crash Twinsanity, but I need to revisit it and see just how open that world felt. But yeah, the quality of Crash games, like, after Naughty Dog, was just mediocre to subpar. Like, Sonic games, it was like, oh, this is almost good, oh, this is terrible. Crash was just like, and that was the thing. Crash 1, 2, and 3 and Crash Team Racing were, like, cream of the crop, some of the best games on PS1. They were super polished, very nice. And then, everything after that is just, never got too terrible, but never got too great. And I think that's why people look back on those games, at least have some fond memories of them, even though they weren't that great. Speaking personally, as much as I would kind of like a remake of Twinsanity, as much as I would kind of like a re-release of Mind Over Mutant, I would say either they remake Crash Team Racing, because there's a lot of demand for that, or they just move on. Like, if they do another Crash game, just make it a new one. You've done your lesson in how to make a Crash Bandicoot game, Vicarious Visions, now put it to use. There's a bunch of other people who are like, oh, they should remake Spyro next. It's like, it would be nice to get a new Spyro game, yes, but one thing at a time. Let's let them figure out how they made a Crash Bandicoot game. Also, Spyro has a unique advantage no one else has. If I'm not mistaken, their original developers were Insomniac. So, that company's still around. And I think, I'm not a huge Spyro fan, so I don't know, but I think you could actually call up Insomniac and say, hey, would you do a new Spyro game for old time's sake? And then you could probably coerce them with enough money. Whereas Crash Bandicoot, yeah, that ain't happening. Because, yeah, the original dev team has pretty much left the industry. Oh, always one of those weird things. So that's what went on with Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. Looks like we are coming up on another break. So I will hit the music. Next up is Avalanche by Bring Me the Horizon. And when we get back, we'll talk some random scattered news, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit about the company VanillaWare, because the other week, someone called me asking about them, and I was like, I was just mentioning them in passing. Let's do a little bit of a retrospective, why don't we? So, after a break, we're going to cover some assorted news, and then we will do a VanillaWare retrospective. Until then, here is Avalanche by Bring Me the Horizon, here on 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave. Diverse music for your diverse mind. Thank you for listening. Hello, you're listening to 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave. Diverse music for your diverse mind. That was Underwater by Larissa Vienna. And this is GameBabble Live, your video game news and information show, which airs every Wednesday from noon to 3 p.m. I'm your host, Jell. Let's get on with random assorted news. So, we already covered, we got Shantae coming to Blaster Master Zero. Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy is out. Evo is, Summer Games Done Quick is this week. Always good entertainment. The Evo Evolution Fighting Game Tournament will be next week, which will have the Mystery Arika Street Fighter EX-ish fighter, along with a Dragon Ball Fighter Z tournament, and plenty of exhibition of that at Evo, because people are so hyped about it. And also next week, Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age, comes out. Super ridiculously hyped about that. I actually have a friend who will be buying a PS4 just to play that game. He skipped an entire console generation, but he's coming back because he likes Final Fantasy XII that much. I'm super excited to get back into it. Moving on from that, though, Bayonetta 2 might be coming to Switch. Shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Nintendo kind of owns Bayonetta 2 in a roundabout way because they funded the development. So, hey, we want to get more people to play Bayonetta 2. Why not re-release it on the Switch? That won't be any problem. This is coming from the fact that there's a new Twitter account from Platinum, which just has a picture of Bayonetta with, a blue and a red background. And it's like, oh, so they're putting it on Switch, huh? Good. Let's see. Little Witch Academia is getting a game. If you haven't seen it, Little Witch Academia was sort of a demo anime that the makers of Kill la Kill made to show off what their studio could do, and people wound up falling in love with it. So they kickstarted a second episode, and then it looks like there's actually a full anime series on Netflix that I should really sit down and watch, but it's getting a video game, which is weirdly a side-scrolling beat-em-up, which looks to be using cell shading darn near on par with what's it called? With Guilty Gear Xrd and, of course, Dragon Ball FighterZ. It looks really close to the anime. It looks super expressive. I think it's going to have sections. It looks like it'll have, some downtime sections where you're just running around the school talking to people and everyone's being super expressive. But the actual, main gameplay, strangely enough, side-scrolling beat-em-up. Okay. Confirmed to be coming to America. Speaking of coming to America, Gundam Versus will be hitting the US PS4, September 29th. I think it comes out like this week or next week in Japan. But September 29th, Gundam Versus comes to the US. Super excited. Hope they release my Noble Gundam. Like, from what I can tell, there are no mechs from G Gundam in it. I'm like, I need my G's, though. G Gundam's my favorite. G Gundam's the best Gundam series. It's the most hated in Japan, but I like it. It's made of pure cheese. If you've never seen G Gundam, I highly recommend it, and that's one of the few that I, like, completely recommend the dub. Dub Domon is actually better than the Japanese voice. He's really good. It's a shame he retired from voice acting and became a dentist, but he's probably a lot better paid that way. Anyway, moving on from that, the Super Nintendo Classic is sold out in Europe. Don't panic, Europe. America, I think everyone is avoiding opening pre-orders because no one has any clue how many of these things they're going to get. Europe opened up pre-orders and they were flooded because everyone wants them. And I don't know what Nintendo's plan is. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to produce plenty more than the NES Classic. And it's like, I still don't think you're going to release enough. A lot of people will buy this just for Star Fox 2. Like myself. And that will be the only way we can play it, because the one that's online is not the completed game. Now, again, I expect that people are going to rip the completed game out of the Super NES Classic. But, yeah, I'd like to play it on the actual freaking unit. And guess what? That's also September 29th. So, hey, two birds with one stone when I camp out outside of GameStop that day. Because I'm going to freaking do that. It's pretty much planned. I'll see you there. Moving past that, let's talk a little bit about Arizona Sunshine, because that's played out very interestingly. If you're unfamiliar, Arizona Sunshine is a virtual reality first-person shooter where you shoot zombies that has been out on PC and received rave reviews, and everyone loves it, and it's so great, and it comes to PlayStation 4, and everyone just craps on it. In spite of its new PlayStation 4 editions, in spite of the fact that it's pretty much the same game, there's very few differences between it and the PC release, the PlayStation VR owners are apparently a bit on the spoiled side. As someone put it, Arizona Sunshine was a first-generation VR game that showed us how full locomotion first-person shooters could be done in VR. And indeed, when you've been sitting there going, why won't they release a full first-person shooter in VR for, like, a year like people on PC were, and then you finally get one, you get a little bit excited. PlayStation VR owners, on the other hand, wound up getting Farpoint before Arizona Sunshine. And while Arizona Sunshine is a nice little indie first-person shooter in VR, Farpoint is actually like a fully polished AAA VR first-person shooter with its own specialized controller just for playing first-person shooters. And a lot of people are saying, you know what, that's kind of a second-generation VR game. We are at the cusp of the second generation of VR games, and it's going to make a lot of the first-generation ones look bad. So, it's interesting, that line of reasoning, and I can't entirely argue with it. And my own reaction to Arizona Sunshine is a bit weird. Like, I don't feel ripped off, but the game was twice as expensive as your average downloadable PlayStation VR title. Like, it was almost full price-ish, but not really, even though it was digital only and a download. And then on the flip side, you had Ancient Amuletors, which I fell completely in love with, in spite of its distinct lack of content. Ancient Amuletors was just way too much fun. So, I don't know. It's all kind of weird. I need to sit down and do another crazy VR game stream. Show you all some Ancient Amuletor and Arizona Sunshine, and I haven't even streamed Farpoint, let alone the new Summer Lesson. One of the things, I mentioned it before, I kind of want to try to do a VR endurance stream. Just go into VR, see how long I can last. Apparently the world record right now is 26 hours. I don't know if I would do that. But apparently, something that's really weird is if you fall asleep in VR, People have described that as being very surreal when you wake up and you're groggy and you're like, why am I in a slightly pixelated sports car? What? Like one person, there were at least 2 reports on the PlayStation VR subreddit, which if you actually own the blasted thing, you need to go to that subreddit because it's the only place to get any sort of information on the blasted thing. Like, if you don't, you'd think there's nothing on it. But if you go there, it's like, oh, hey, Sony kind of releases new games for it every week. No guarantee on quality, but it happens. But, like, 2 people reported this. One fell asleep playing Drive Club and just woke up in a car very confused. The other one fell asleep playing Perfect, which is darn near a VR screensaver, so they were on a virtual beach when they fell asleep. Good times, good times. I think the last thing I want to talk about before we crack into the Vanillaware retrospective after a break is female priest for Dungeon Fighter Online. I finally got a chance to sit down with her, and I am impressed. I very much like the character. I like the variety I see. It's not quite as insane as Female Slayer, but good times were had. I'm working on a mistress right now, which is the one that goes evil and uses a scythe and can transform into a demon. But my main one that I've been using is a shaman. And the shaman class, they get prayer beads that float behind them, and they can just command them to shoot at enemies. And they are a ludicrous ranged class. Because I could really just sit back and throw rocks at people all day. Just spam that button and I win. Because I can shoot a nice barrage of, like, powerful, long-range rocks at people super fast. Like, it's almost like having a melee attack that covers the entire screen. I can do an aerial, like, bead shot thing. Or I could have all my beads, like, cluster up and hit them at once. And that's just, as soon as you turn into a shaman, you get those abilities. But you lose some of your melee abilities, including some of the ones you had before you make the class change. Because I had cross slash and, like, a dash and slash move, and those go away as soon as you become a shaman. Which, it's the first time I've seen that happen. Usually you keep the pre-class change moves at the very least. But in this case, no, you don't. Very odd, very odd. But overall, yeah, pleased with the class, pleased with the game as usual, because I'm so glad Dungeon Fighter is back. If you never played the goofy thing, Dungeon Fighter is a now 10-year-old side-scrolling beat-em-up MMO out of Korea. Yeah, it's a free-to-play one, so if you're randomly curious, just go Google it and try it out, because it's free. You pay the money to customize your characters is what you do. But it actually was very, very popular in Korea, but had a hard time making it overseas. It took them 5 years before they made a deal with Nexon to distribute the game worldwide. And then Nexon ran it for about 2 years, updated it for about a year and a half, screwed up a lot of things with the US launch, and pretty much cannibalized the game with their own game Vindictus and shut it down. Game never made it out of beta in Europe, and plenty of the world hadn't played it. So, hearing everyone complain, the original Korean developers, Neopal, were like, we'll take matters into our own hands, and we'll do the servers, and they'll be the world servers. So, no IP blocking on the world servers. We got people from Brazil, we got people from Australia, people from Europe. Everyone's invited. That means PvP is going to be a bit on the laggy side if you try to do that. But otherwise, everyone's invited, and it's super fun times. And I am so glad they did that, because I've given up mostly on MMOs. For me, it's waiting for Sega to actually release Phantasy Star Online 2 in English. And yes, I know about the fan translation, but the fan translation exists in such a weird limbo state that not a lot of people want to take a risk with it, because there's certain things that are left untranslated, and technically, Sega can ban us from the game because we are outside of their service area. So there's no real guarantee you'd be able to keep playing it. And as such, I have a hard time convincing all my friends to download and play Phantasy Star Online 2 in English. And yeah, Dungeon Fighter is like the other MMO I care about. That Skyforge on PS4 was pretty alright, but for me, those are the only two I care about. Because again, it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up MMO, which has like command input, so you do quarter circle forward and special, and your character can throw a Hadouken. Very nice, very nice. Good times to be had by all. Combos are nuts. Like, look up some Dungeon Fighter combo videos on YouTube. It's crazy. Anyway, looks like it's time for a brief break. Slightly longer break than before. We will resume a little after 2 to do ourselves a nice little Vanillaware retrospective. I'll go get me a drink of water. Until then, please enjoy Dance With Ya by Drew Baldridge here on 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave. Diverse music for your diverse mind. Please stay tuned, and thank you so much. Hello, you're listening to 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave. Diverse music for your diverse mind. That was Seein' Red by Dustin Lynch. And this is GameBabble Live, your video game news and information show, which airs every Wednesday from noon to 3 p.m. So, we've discussed a bunch of news. I'm super happy about a lot of things. And I figure it's about time to round down the show with a very long ramble about Vanillaware. Someone asked about Vanillaware last week, and it got me thinking, let's do ourselves a little retrospective, shall we? So, Vanillaware. They're a slightly obscure company, but you might have heard of them here or there. Known mostly for their gorgeous 2D visuals, Vanillaware has a knack for making video games look like paintings come to life. And it is just, people used to argue about, are video games art? All you need to do is throw a Vanillaware game in their face, and I don't know how a video game can't be art after you play a Vanillaware game. But they've got kind of an interesting history. Also, it is worth mentioning, part of the reason why they're not that well known and why they've only done a couple of games throughout the years is because apparently the company has 26 employees. And they're like 100% artists, is how they're described. Which I understand, considering how their games look. But yeah, 26 employees. Not a whole lot. So, the core of Vanillaware is their founder and president, the infamous George Kamitani. Which you're going to say, wow, George Kamitani, that's a weird name. Kind of half American, half Japanese. Okay, no, what it is, his name is actually Joji Kamitani. But he likes to be called George. So, George Kamitani. He used to work at Capcom, believe it or not, mostly on the game Dungeons & Dragons Tower of Doom. That was a Dungeons & Dragons arcade game, the first one. He actually DM'd the campaign, because they played Tower of Doom as a D&D campaign, tabletop, before making the actual game. And he pretty much fronted the development of Tower of Doom, trying to figure out how to adapt all the D&D isms to a fantastic side-scrolling beat-em-up. He was not, however, involved in its fantastic sequel, Dungeons & Dragons Shadow over Mystara. He only did Tower of Doom. After that, he kind of went freelance and wound up joining up with Atlas to make what is widely considered to be the first Vanillaware game, though it wasn't officially. That being Princess Crown. Released only in Japan on the Sega Saturn, it became a favorite amongst Saturn importers. See, the Sega Saturn actually had a ton of games in Japan, but in America, the library was a bit sparse, and they kind of just stopped making games for it in America after a while. So anyone who really loved the Sega Saturn back then, well, they imported their games. And when they saw Princess Crown, they fell in love with it. It was a gorgeous, ridiculously detailed 2D side-scrolling action RPG. And the best part was, it was super stupidly visual. You pretty much didn't even need to know Japanese to play it. Yeah, sure, you didn't exactly know what the story was, but you knew about what was going on. Like, all the items were shown visually, instead of just being like text or anything. It's like, oh, I see that's a fruit. And then you press down and you pick up the fruit. And then you see the fruit goes into the main character's like magic brooch of holding. And then when you access your item menu, this ring of items flies out of her, like, magic brooch, and then you choose it, and it's each one is, like, shown as, like, an actual picture full size of the item. So you know, oh, I want to eat the fruit. I just spin it until she's holding a fruit in her hand, click it, and she'll take the fruit and she'll eat it, and she'll take one bite out of it, and that represented one use of the fruit. And like, you could take like 2 or 3 bites out of each fruit, and then you could throw the seed on the ground, and then the seed could grow into a tree and produce more fruit. And it was weird, and it was nuts, and it was gorgeous. It had a very fairy tale vibe to it. You couldn't help but love the main menu, which was like a little girl and her grandmother in a rocking chair, and the grandmother's like, bring me a story to read, and each storybook represented a different character, because you unlocked more after you beat the game. And there was also a cat, and if you brought her the cat, that would be the options menu. But you bring her the storybook, and it opens up, and there's like 3 different bookmarks, and those are your different save games. And you select your save game, and you like saw the little girl like come in close as her grandmother begins reading, and then it starts loading the game, and it's like, this is so gorgeous and adorable and so incredibly visual. But that said, the combat in it was very simplistic. It was a relatively easy game to play because, yeah, it was just so visual, and that was why people liked it. You didn't need to know Japanese to enjoy Princess Crown. A while after that was like the last game we really saw them for a while. George Kamitani was working freelance and worked with Square Enix to do the art for an MMORPG called Fantasy Earth Zero, which I never played, but looking at the visuals, it's like, oh yeah, that's flagrantly Kamitani's art. Know that artwork anywhere. But while all this was going on, there were rumors floating around about a sequel to Princess Crown on the Sega Saturn. At the time, we didn't know it, but its name was Dragon's Crown. And it was actually originally going to be 3D, but the game got canceled. It was pretty much not going to happen, but we didn't really know this. We just knew there were rumors about a new Princess Crown for the Sega Saturn, and that it got moved to the PS2, people were saying. That was supposed to have these gorgeous visuals. I remember hearing this a few years before it was finally revealed that the game they were working on was Odin Sphere. The first game officially released by Vanillaware proper, and it caused our jaws to drop. See, this was still at a time when we were arguing 2D versus 3D, and Sony Computer Entertainment America actually had a quality control rule that you could not release a 2D game in America at full price. You could release it, but it had to be budget priced. But then, Odin Sphere is shown, and they break the rule for that one. The visuals were so gorgeous. It looked like a moving painting. It was so intricately detailed. And just the resolution on it was so high for the time. Everyone just couldn't believe what they were seeing. And the Princess Crown fans were especially excited because it was like, this is just like Princess Crown, but it's Odin's, but it's new and way prettier. And the game comes out, and it winds up being a bit divisive. Because, of course, the fans of 2D art always say gameplay is more important than graphics. But all of a sudden, they find themselves with the shoe on the other foot, as the gameplay was a little wonky for the original release of Odin Sphere. It wasn't bad, but it was very Princess Crown-esque in the fact that it was very simplistic and kind of slow. Like, you only had a couple of attacks, and they all had so much recovery time that you had to be very methodical in your attacks. There were no, like, really crazy combos, and you had to wait until your stamina gauge refilled until you could really attack again. And a lot of people didn't like it. It didn't help that the game was actually so gorgeous that it slowed the PS2 to a crawl. Much of this was due to the way the item system worked. But yeah, infamously, when you got to the last boss of the first character's storyline, the game would come to an unplayable crawl. And so the game wound up being divisive, which was a shame, because the story was great. And it was flagrantly pretty much a sequel to Princess Crown. Once again, we had a little girl, only this time there was no grandmother. She was in the attic, and you chose from a bunch of different books. Then she'd sit down on the chair and begin reading the story. So it kept that whole theme. Same thing with the fruit, which, oh, egad, the way they evolved the farming in what is a side-scrolling action game. But at the same time, it was a bit weird. Now, a little thing that's actually going to be of important note later on in this retrospective. The main character, like, Princess Crown had some other characters, but they were just sort of bonus chapters. The main character of Princess Crown was literally an armored princess who wanted to be a brave queen like her mother, who had fought back an army of demons. And she goes around the country, like, solving problems and trying to make the world a better place. Meanwhile, there's, like, some kind of crazy conspiracy behind the scenes of people summoning demons and stuff. I never actually beat the game, but I got pretty far in. And, yeah, Odin's Sphere was somewhat similar. You started by playing as a Valkyrie named Gradriel. Gradriel's the chick from Princess Crown. What's that? Gwendolyn. Different G name. Gwendolyn was the Valkyrie in Odin's Sphere. Gradriel was in Princess Crown. Odin's Sphere, you had Gwendolyn. Then after that, you played as Cornelius, who was like, this guy gets turned into a bunny knight. Then after that, you play as Mercedes, Princess of the Fairies. Then after that was Oswald, the Dark Knight. And then after that was Velvet, the Princess of Valentine. I think the country was named Valentine. So you had 3 female playable characters, 2 male. And you played each one, like, one after the other. You didn't really get to choose. Again, this will become important later in the story. So Odin's Sphere happened, and it was super pretty. And shortly following that, amazingly, they had a second game in development. Shortly following Odin's Sphere was a real-time strategy game called Grim Grimoire. Once again, it was about a young girl, this time going to a very Hogwarts-esque magic school, when all of a sudden, after 1 week, something goes horribly wrong, tons of people start dying, and she finds a means to reset the week. And she pretty much replays her first week of school over and over again, desperately trying to figure out how to stop this huge tragedy from happening. I loved the story. And in terms of real-time strategy games on console, it was very, very good. Unfortunately, all the environments looked freaking identical. No joke, every single one of them, same background. And you're replaying the same, like, week over and over again. It's like, it gets a little repetitive. I'll be honest, I didn't play very far into that when I actually tossed it to a friend of mine who loves Harry Potter and StarCraft, and I was like, well, here's Harry Potter StarCraft, and she adored it, and I just watched her play through the whole game. It was great, because the story for that game is really, really good. Love it. Go watch a Let's Play of that. And if you're, like, actually interested, do not pay stupid money for that one. They have it actually as a PS2 classic for your PS3. It's not on the PS4, but if you have a PS3, that would probably be the better way to do it, because I know it sometimes fetches kind of high-ish prices. I don't know. Anyway, after that came the Nintendo Wii game Muramasa the Demon Blade, wherein you had a choice between 2 different characters. It's like Ninja Guy and a princess possessed by a samurai spirit named Momohime. And this one had it was obviously Japanese themed. Once again, side-scrolling action, gorgeous painterly graphics, and it had more of a free open world, more reminiscent of Princess Crown, because Odin's Sphere was weirdly stage-based, while Princess Crown was actually an open world. It seemed a little button-mashy to me, but a lot of people really gravitated towards this one, because though the combat was, once again, simplistic, it was much faster and much more responsive, and people liked it a lot more. It would eventually get a re-release on PlayStation Vita as Muramasa Rebirth, and the Rebirth release also added in the ability to have DLC, and they released 4 bonus DLC characters you could buy, which had really short storylines, but then you could just run around the world beating people up as these different, really interesting alternate characters as well. And speaking of re-releases, Princess Crown did get a re-release on PSP, though neither of these were released in America. Also on Vita, and this is one of the few Vanillaware games that didn't make it to America. It almost did. Actually, no, it was a PSP game. There was a PSP game called Grand Knight's History from Vanillaware, which I know very little about because it was supposed to come to America, and then they realized no one buys PSP games, so they didn't bring it. Apparently, the translation was pretty much finished, which is a darn shame. Now it's time for all this to come together, because the next game from the fine folks at Vanillaware would be the now infamous Dragon's Crown. Yes, the game they had originally planned to be a 3D beat-em-up on the Dreamcast had come back for Vita and PlayStation 3 as a proper 2D side-scroller. And I was ecstatic. It looked so gorgeous. I couldn't believe it. It was like, wow, you're practically making a new D&D beat-em-up, but with your gorgeous graphics and 4-player local and online play, and I couldn't wait to sink my teeth into it. So I waited 3 years for this thing to come out, and Lord knows it had been in pseudo-development for longer. And then, just as it's nearing release, controversy slaps us in the face as a writer for Kotaku decided to do a crappy article being about the sorceress. He cracks a dumb joke about it. George Kamitani cracks a dumb joke back, and then he decides to get offended, and literally every single game journalist gets up in arms about how terrible and horrible George Kamitani is and how much he hates women. This was why I mentioned this about the previous games. Literally every single game Vanillaware has ever made either has a female lead or a choice of a male or female lead. Every single one. And I would like to go on record to point out that Dragon's Crown has a radically different visual style from all the other Vanillaware games. You see, for most of the other Vanillaware games, they went with sort of a storybook fairy tale look. It was very light and pretty and colorful, and the characters had kind of biggish heads and small bodies, whereas Dragon's Crown, they went for more of a slightly harder fantasy, and the characters had larger bodies and smaller heads. And yes, preposterously exaggerated proportions for everyone. That was part of its charm, though, because it was so different from everything else Vanillaware did. It was still that same visual style. It was still unquestionably George Kamitani and friends throwing this thing together, but it looked so different. I mean, Dragon's Crown pretty much looks like a Dungeons & Dragons guidebook, like all the artwork from that come to life. And I always wanted a game like that, so I was very happy with it. But I just found it interesting that so many people complained about this game, yet in complaining about it and how terrible George Kamitani was, they proved that they knew nothing about Vanillaware and didn't really look at their games. It's a bit of a sore point for me, because as you can tell, I'm a bit of a fan of the company, as well as Dragon's Crown. Which, yes, ludicrous proportions. But that's part of its charm. So Dragon's Crown comes out, though, and it actually winds up being the most successful and well-known Vanillaware game ever because of all this controversy. Welcome to the Streisand effect. And, yeah, so people actually play it, and it's very nice, because it's the kind of game you wouldn't even think could exist. It's a 4-player co-op 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up sold at full price and worth it. The visuals were gorgeous. The gameplay, though seemingly simplistic with no complex inputs, there was actually plenty of moves to it, and it was kind of meaty. See, you go through all the dungeons once to get the basic storyline of it, and then you're supposed to go through them again to collect orbs, and the second time you go through a dungeon, there's a branching path halfway through the dungeon where you can choose Do you want to go Route A or Route B? And then the second half of the dungeon is completely different from the first half. It has a completely different boss. It's just nuts. And the game is so full of references. And I actually bought it and pre-ordered it, so I had the art book. And oh, egad, that art book almost made me cry, because it actually opens with a thank you message from George Kamitani, where he talks about the game. And he talks about his love of Dungeons and Dragons and choose-your-own-adventure games, and, like, the choose-your-own-adventure books he read and stuff. And you read it and you realize this was a labor of love. Dragon's Crown was literally George Kamitani saying, I'm going to take everything I love and just smash it together into this game. It has elements of the choose-your-own-adventure books he loved. It has references to Disney movies that you just absolutely wouldn't expect. It has, references to Baroque artwork. It's just so full of all these random references to things, which honestly enhances the feeling of it being a D&D campaign, because it also has this narrator that's constantly talking over everything with very flowery language. I particularly love the part where if you take a secret path to go on this pirate ship in this one cave of treasures, you'll be ambushed by pirates, and the friggin' narrator will burst in and go, they were being duplicitous. It was all a ruse. Favorite line in the whole game. I love it. I love it. It was brilliant. It was very brilliant. And I wonder if the servers are still up, because I think they might be. Thank goodness, though, that though the game is kind of meant to be played online, it can be played offline as well. And I loved the way they handled the online play, because it's drop in, drop out. You just go into a dungeon, and people will just join in as they popped coins in an arcade machine. And that's just a question of how long they last with you, because as this whole system where the longer you go without going back to town, the better, prizes you get, but then you also have to worry about your weapon durability, and that's why when you stick around, you go into the weird cooking system. The game was kind of nuts, and yeah, it's repetitive, it's a beat-em-up, but if you liked beat-em-ups, oh my god, the content was nuts. Because after you beat the game the first time, it goes, oh yeah, that was just one of 3 dragons. And now you're supposed to replay it on a higher difficulty, which actually introduces new enemies, and you're supposed to beat it on 3 different difficulties. And on top of that, they added in a, dungeon just made of a randomly generated dungeon made of rooms from all the previous dungeons, and that sort of wound up being this survival mode. And Dragon's Crown is just a really, really nuts game. And the fact that they haven't re-released it on PS4 is a shame. But you know what they did re-release on PS4? Odin Sphere. George Kamitani has been working on a different game, likely 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, which we'll get back to in just a minute. But some of the other people were like, hey, how about we clean up Odin Sphere? You see, they had planned way back on PS3 to, do an HD re-release of Odin Sphere, now with no slowdown. Alright, that alone had us all intrigued. But then they got carried away. And what they made was Odin Sphere Leifthauser? I don't know, it's Odin Sphere that's on PS4, and it is amazing. Because they completely overhauled everything except the story. The story is the same. The voice acting is the same. It still has that same fantastic dub. A few line tweaks, but for the most part, it's the same. But the gameplay, oh egad, instead of, every room just being a weird ring, there's, way more environment variety. You have rooms with actual topography. And the combat is way faster and more responsive, and you can do crazy combos, and there's this huge skill system with tons of moves, and you can do specials by doing quarter circle motions, but you assign what move you want to the quarter circle motion, so you don't really have to either. And there's just all these new crazy systems and subsystems and things they added into the game, but the story is still the same great story. They added in new boss monsters and new areas to all these dungeons. They just fleshed it out so much that though it's the same game, gameplay-wise, it bears almost no resemblance to the original Odin Sphere. So much so that, and I love that they did this, They said, you know what, maybe some people would just like the original in HD with no slowdown. So on the main menu, there's an option to play the original game. And when I say the original, I mean the original in HD with no slowdown. Like, it tells you this is a different game with different save files, so you know, because it's radically different. And when you click it, it loads up the old PS2 company logos. And the old PS2, like, title screen. And you start to notice, wait, the art is slightly different for the PS2 one. It's a little bit more zoomed in. Some of the characters are a little bit bigger, but it's still in HD and should have no slowdown. Admittedly, I didn't play long enough to get to Odette in that version of the game, because why play that one when I could play the better one? But it loads up the old game, and I was like, I don't believe this. It is literally, like, identical near as I can tell. So if you want to play the PS2 game minus slowdown and know what it originally was, it's sitting there. But the remake is, whoo. And here's the good news. Here's the best news. Because I'm probably saying all this and you're like, wow, I'm really sold on this game. And technically, I'm not allowed to really sell you on things. I can just tell you that I really like them. But good news. There is a playable demo on PSN. Very nice demo. It pretty much gives you like a room or two with each of the 5 different playable characters. So it'll give you a good idea what the game's like. So if you're curious about this game, get the demo. Because that'll tell you way more about the game than... it's like, a picture's worth 1,000 words. A demo's worth, like, 100,000 words. I don't know. A demo's worth a lot of words. Just play the demo, you'll know what you're getting into. Now, the next game from Vanillaware, which was shown at E3, and we still don't entirely know what it is 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. And I will actually get back to you on that because I think it is just about time for a quick break. So, let me get this all set up. There we go. How about we take a quick break, and when we get back, I'll tell you about 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, and then something else called Grand Kingdom. Until then, though, please enjoy You Look Good by Lady Antebellum. And in a little bit, I will be right back. So thank you very much for listening to 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave, diverse music for your diverse mind. This is GameBabble, and we'll be back soon after You Look Good by Lady Antebellum and a quick break. Hello, you are listening to 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave, diverse music for your diverse mind. I'm your host, Jell, and that was That Part by Schoolboy Q featuring Kanye West. And this is GameBabble Live, your video game news and information show, which airs every Wednesday from noon to 3 p.m. I'm your host, Jell, and before the break there, we were going over all the different games that Vanillaware had released, bit of a retrospective. So now we're reaching the end of that and the end of the show, where I wanted to talk a little bit about 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, which is their newest game. Unfortunately, there's not a lot to say because we know nothing. There's been 2 kind of trailers. What we know is that it takes place in more modern-day Japan with, like, high schoolers and giant robots, which normally is what you would expect out of a Japanese video game. That's pretty normal, but it's weird to see it out of Vanillaware. Because it still has that gorgeous, storybook-esque, painterly visual style, but applied to that, it looks like it's probably going to be a bit on the dark side with some atmosphere. But I have absolutely, positively not one single freaking clue what this game is, other than something involving high schoolers and giant robots. From Vanillaware. No clue what genre it is, no clue what the gameplay is. I just know it's coming, it's confirmed for America, and it's pretty. But there's one more game I wanted to talk about. And that, my good friends, is Grand Kingdom. You see, Grand Kingdom is a game that you look at and you say, is that Vanillaware? I don't think so, but it's really close. That's because it's made by ex-Vanillaware employees. See, come to find out, some of the people who worked on Grand Knight's History I guess, wanted to make more turn-based games. Because Vanillaware has generally been focusing on side-scrolling action games with simple controls, but more depth than you'd think they would have. That's generally been Vanillaware's thing, that and having cooking systems in a lot of their games. But the people who made Grand Knight's History, they were like, hey, how about we do something turn-based that's super deep with a bajillion stats? And I don't think that really jived with the direction Vanillaware was going. So they split off and formed their own company, which I believe was called Monochrome. And they made this game that uses a very similar way of animating 2D as Vanillaware, but obviously with a very different artist. And I love it, because it's like, hey, it's another high-resolution, gorgeous 2D game, but with a different visual style than the usual Vanillaware. The game itself is a ridiculous strategy game. Like, basically what you do is you play the leader of a squad of mercenaries in a world where there are 4 different warring nations, and in the background of that, someone's trying to, like, summon a giant demon to bring back their kingdom and destroy the world. It's pretty nuts, but what makes it interesting, like, you yourself, you're not a character. It's theoretically played in first person. You got 2 advisors, like the mercenary guy and the daughter of the head of the mercenaries guild, who will tell you, like, the safe thing to do and the thing that will get you the most glory, so you can, like, weigh your options, but you yourself aren't there. What you do instead is you recruit a pile of mercenaries. It's very Final Fantasy Tactics-esque, or really a lot of strategy games like this, where you go to a recruitment office, and there's tons of just generic classes you can recruit. I think there's like 15, 16 different classes, and you just choose which, like, they've got some pre-made characters, you choose which one, then you get to customize them, choose a hairstyle, face, skin tone, what color scheme you want for them. So it's limited customization, but it's enough, and then you type in a name, you set up their stats, they join your party, and you can have, like, I think 50 different characters, and you can set them up into, like, 5 different adventuring parties, and then when you go out on a mission, it's this weird turn-based board game-ish type of thing, where every time you make a move, everyone else makes a move, and there's, like, hidden enemies that will only be visible briefly every 3rd turn, and obstacles to get through. It's a little bit roguelike in that respect, and yeah, when you clash with an enemy unit, it then goes into this side-scrolling turn-based combat thing, where, you take turns, like, moving around and stuff, and it's slightly action-y. Like, when you choose to attack the enemy, you can either set it up where you have, like, a preset combo on one button, and you just press that with the right timing, or you can assign a different move to every single button, and then, yeah, you go in there and you do a juggle combo on the enemy. The longer you can keep them in the air, the better, and the more damage you can do. And that applies to, like, the magic-using classes as well. When you cast a spell, like, you get this cursor going over this area of effect, and you hit the button to launch the enemy into the air with your spell, and you keep juggling them, and how you hit them with the spell determines how they fall, and the same thing with archery, and, on top of that, you can set up, like, how your team comes into battle, because you could have it where, like, your archers stand on boxes, or you set up some, like, magic-enhancing crystals for your mages. And there's just layers upon layers upon layers of depth and strategy to this game, to the point where if I have to warn you about anything, it's how burnt out you're going to get on it. Because I played this game, like, super hardcore for, like, 3 months, and now I have a hard time coming back to it, because it's kind of dense once you get into it. Because there's so much that you do, there's so many stats and subsystems that you're just juggling here, and, like, yeah, it's super fun at first, and then it's just like, wow, I'm micromanaging so much, and, like, the combat isn't just, hey, you attack that. No, you have to actively, like, do juggle combos and things. Eventually, it does wear on you and say, whew, this game's a bit much, but heck if I didn't like it. That one's on Vita and PS4, and good news, there's a demo once again. So if you're curious, go look up the Grand Kingdom demo. And yeah, it's a thing. Like, I think it's a darn shame so few people talk about Grand Kingdom. I've barely heard anyone talk about Grand Kingdom. And I'm like, it's such a meaty strategy game, though, and one that's different from the others. And yeah, it has 5 single-player campaigns, actually. At the start, you just do the Mercenary Guild one, and then after you beat the Mercenary Guild story, there's one for each kingdom, which were sold in Japan as DLC, but we just haven't packed in. And then on top of that, they have the online war system, where you don't directly fight people, but you can send your units off to war, and when other people, go into war, because you can also join into these fights, then they face off against all the different, sent-out computer-controlled player units, and you have to fight them. And the war system's pretty nutty. You're on a time limit, and you have a limited amount of time to try to take over an area in order to expand the influence of your kingdom versus the other kingdoms, and then you can go to the special kingdom shop to get rare items. There's more items depending upon how well you do and how much influence your kingdom has. It's pretty nuts. I don't think a lot of people actively play it anymore. It came out about a year ago, but it's still very, very much something you can poke at and have some fun with. And one of these days I need to sit down again and see if I can reclaim the nation of Magion, because I always went with Magion. And, yeah, Land Earth kind of rules the world. It's like, maybe if no one's playing, I can use Magia. I can take back the world for Magion now. Who knows? Anyway, that about wraps up my little retrospective on the ever-interesting Vanillaware. Unfortunately, I don't think any of their games have actually gotten PC releases. Not through actual channels anyway, so bit of warning there. You know what, before I go, one more thing. Princess Maker 3, I did of course download it and give it a playthrough. Translation's a bit rough. They're going to be fixing some bugs. I think they got the resolution wrong on the main character's sprite, because it looks more pixelated than it should be, and it's like, I think your pixels are too long? You made the image too tall? Maybe? A little hard to tell. But yeah, it's a little off. Company is, of course, trying to fix it like they usually do, because it's being translated by, a Chinese company. The main thing I wanted to say about Princess Maker 3 is, if you do play it, egad, start as either a knight or a priest, because you get to choose what your occupation was. I chose traveling entertainer. That was a bad move. You don't choose anything other than knight or priest, or you are kind of screwed. Basically, your daughter will either start snobby or delinquent in, any other occupation. The only way to get her to just be normal is to be a knight or a priest. So there's your advice on Princess Maker 3 for the 5 Princess Maker fans out there, none of which are actually listening to the show. But I like to pretend. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed today's GameBabble Live. And I hope to see you again next week. And yeah, we'll see how that Mystery Arika Fighter goes at E3, and how the Dragon Ball Fighter Z tournament's gonna go. That's gonna be pretty nuts. And I, of course, cannot wait to get my hands on Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age. Actually, let me check something. Let me hit up the PSVR Reddit, because, okay, no VR games this week. Is there anything next week? Because I think I heard something about Super Hot coming out really soon. Tiny Tracks is July 25th. Okay. Ace Combat 7 is going to have a VR mode. We know that. Ultra Wings is coming to PSVR, quote, soon, which is the same thing with Radial G. Yeah. Forget, when is... I'm not seeing anything on the... I want to say... Let me double check that. Yeah, maybe it's... Maybe Super Hot VR is the 17th or 18th. I don't know. It feels like that should be coming soon. Whatever. We'll find out when we get you there. Anyway, thank you for listening to GameBabble Live. I'm your host, Jell. Hope to see you again next week. And now, I will kick you back to the diverse music for your diverse mind here on 89.5 FM KCFV The Wave. Again, thank you for listening. Please enjoy, and see you later.